Let's cut through the nonsense. For years, American presidents have loved to play tough guy on the world stage, threatening allies, lecturing rivals, and throwing their weight around like schoolyard bullies. But here's the truth. Donald Trump can huff and puff all he likes, yet there is one nation he simply cannot afford to be tough on anymore, and that nation is India. Why? Because India isn't the same country Washington once treated as a junior partner. This is a nation of 1.4 billion people, a booming economy, a nuclear power, and the world's fastest growing tech hub. The West needs India far more than India needs the West. For Trump, the equation is brutally simple. He can insult Europe, he can feud with Canada, he can even pick fights with China. But India, that's a different story. America's entire Indo-Pacific strategy hinges on New Delhi standing strong against Beijing. And let's not forget the millions of Indian Americans who form one of the most successful, influential, and politically engaged communities in the United States. You don't casually antagonize them if you want to win elections. The reality is India is no longer a spectator on the global stage. It's a player, a leader, and in many ways, a partner America can't do without. That's why Trump's bluster hits a wall when it comes to India. He can't risk trade wars, he can't risk alienating voters, and he certainly can't risk pushing India closer to America's rivals. The balance of power has shifted, and Trump knows it. Let's be brutally honest about what's happening here. For decades, India was dismissed by the West as a chaotic democracy, an overpopulated nation riddled with poverty and bureaucracy, a country that could never quite match the pace of the so-called developed world. Well, guess what? That tired old narrative is dead. Today, India isn't just keeping pace, it's outpacing. It's the fastest growing major economy on the planet, an epicenter of innovation, and a rising geopolitical titan. And whether Washington likes it or not, that reality has completely changed the rules of the game. We're talking about a country with 1.4 billion people. That's not just a number. That's a market bigger than Europe and the United States combined. Silicon Valley companies aren't lining up in India by accident. They know the future of technology, digital infrastructure, and consumer power is being written in New Delhi and Bangalore, not just in California. From software engineers to space missions, India is showing the world that it isn't just part of the conversation, it's leading it. Look at energy. Look at defense. Look at trade. India is now the world's third largest energy consumer. It's modernizing its military faster than almost anyone else. Buying from Russia, yes, but also building crucial partnerships with the United States and France. It's signing trade deals left and right. And here's the inconvenient truth for those still clinging to outdated prejudices: India doesn't need America as much as America needs India. That's the power shift staring us in the face. And it's not just economics, it's culture, it's influence. Bollywood isn't just entertainment, it's soft power on a scale the West can't quite comprehend. Indian origin CEOs are running the world's biggest companies: Google, Microsoft, Adobe. The diaspora is shaping politics, business, and media across the globe. These aren't signs of a country waiting for validation. These are signs of a country that has arrived. So when people ask, why can't a US president just turn up the heat on India the way they do with others? The answer is simple. You can't strong-arm a country that holds this much leverage. You can't lecture a nation that has become the indispensable partner in balancing China's growing dominance. And you certainly can't belittle a democracy that's now positioning itself as the voice of the global South, representing nations that feel ignored by Western elites. This isn't some fragile, dependent state waiting for handouts. This is a superpower in the making, and it knows its worth. That's why the old tactics, threats, pressure, sanctions, fall flat. They don't scare India anymore. If anything, they backfire, because India knows it can play the field, strike deals with Moscow, welcome investment from Europe, and still walk into Washington with its head held high. The bottom line: India has moved from being seen as a follower to being respected as a leader. And leaders don't get pushed around. They get courted. they get partnered with, they get treated as equals. That's why the rhetoric changes the moment the conversation turns to India, because the stakes are too high, the power too great, and the influence too undeniable. Here's the cold, hard truth: the United States can't execute its grand strategy without India. It doesn't matter how much bluster comes out of Washington, or how many speeches get made about alliances and freedom. The reality is brutally simple. If America wants to remain the dominant global power, if it wants to keep China in check, if it wants stability in the Indo-Pacific, then it needs India. Full stop. And this isn't just theory. Look at the map. China is flexing its muscles in the South China Sea, buying influence across Africa and Latin America, trying to rewrite the rules of global trade to suit its own interests. Who's the natural counterweight in Asia? Who's sitting right there with the size, the population, the military, and the will to push back? It's not Japan, it's not Australia, it's India. Without India, America's entire Indo-Pacific strategy is a hollow slogan. That's why every American administration, no matter how tough they talk, always ends up rolling out the red carpet for New Delhi, because they know that a partnership with India isn't optional, it's essential. And this dependency goes deeper than just geopolitics. It's about economics too. US companies are pouring billions into India because they see it as the future engine of growth. Cheap labor, skilled engineers, a digital market exploding with potential. It's all there. The US economy is tied up with India's future success, and no president can ignore that without shooting America in the foot. Then there's defense. America wants allies who can actually fight, who can stand up to aggression in their own backyard. India has the manpower, the resources, and increasingly, the hardware to do it. That's why Washington sells billions in weapons to New Delhi and signs military agreements designed to bind the two countries closer together. Because they know, if you don't have India on your side, you don't have a strategy worth anything. And let's not pretend this is a one-way street. India knows it holds the cards. It buys oil from Russia, builds ties with Europe, expands trade with the Middle East, all while sitting down with Washington as an equal partner. That's leverage. That's power. When you're that central to so many global equations, you don't get dictated to. You get courted. And America knows it. So when people say, "Oh, Trump can be tough on anyone, he doesn't care who he offends," the answer is yes, but with limits. India is the limit, because if he pushes too hard, the consequences aren't just political embarrassment, they're strategic disaster. He'd risk handing influence straight to Beijing, alienating a market every US corporation is desperate to crack, and undermining the very partnerships America needs to stay relevant. That's the dependency no one in Washington likes to admit out loud. America needs India more than India needs America. And that is exactly why toughness turns into handshakes, threats turn into photo ops, and bluster melts into diplomacy the moment India is on the table. Politics, at its core, is a numbers game. And if there's one thing Donald Trump understands better than anyone else, it's numbers. He knows votes. He knows crowds. He knows constituencies that can make or break an election. And that is exactly why he treads so carefully when it comes to India. Because being tough on India isn't just a foreign policy risk, it's political suicide. Think about it. Indian Americans are one of the most successful, influential, and rapidly growing communities in the United States. They're doctors, engineers, entrepreneurs, CEOs. They hold enormous sway in swing states like Texas, Georgia, and Pennsylvania. Their wealth, their networks, their political donations. All of it matters. You don't insult or antagonize a community like that if you're trying to claw your way back into the White House. Trump knows it. His advisors know it. Every strategist worth their paycheck knows it. Now add this: India isn't just a domestic voter base. It's a symbol of strength, democracy, and independence that millions of Americans actually admire. In an era where China is seen as the big threat, standing alongside India plays well with the American public. It looks strong, it looks strategic, it looks like leadership. Picking a fight with India would look reckless, foolish, and self-defeating. And Trump, for all his bravado, is not stupid enough to waste political capital on a fight he cannot win. And remember his track record. Trump has no issue hammering Europe over NATO spending. He'll throw Canada under the bus for trade deals. He'll trash Mexico at a rally and turn it into a chant. But when it comes to India, his tone shifts. Suddenly, the language softens. Suddenly, it's about friendship, partnership, respect. Because deep down, he knows the risks. He knows alienating India doesn't just cost him a few headlines. It could cost him the election. Let's be real here. American politics is changing. The Indian-American vote is no longer some tiny demographic tucked away in a corner. It's a rising force, and every candidate has to calculate their words with that in mind. Trump thrives on controversy, but he also thrives on winning. And winning means knowing when to pick a fight and when to bite your tongue. With India, he bites his tongue. And beyond voters, there's the donor class. Some of the wealthiest, most influential figures backing political campaigns in America have Indian roots. That kind of money doesn't just buy influence, it buys silence. It ensures that any toughness stays performative at best. A soundbite maybe, but never a sustained attack. So let's not kid ourselves. Trump isn't pulling punches with India because of some sudden surge of diplomatic respect. He's doing it because he knows the stakes, he knows the math. And in politics, math always wins. He can afford to be the tough guy with Europe. He can afford to spar with Mexico. He can afford to throw tariffs at China. But with India, he simply can't afford it. Not if he wants to stay in the game. The world isn't what it used to be. The days when Washington could wag its finger at other countries and expect instant obedience are gone. And nowhere is that clearer than with India. The power dynamics have shifted. The balance has changed. What used to be a relationship of dominance has now become a relationship of equals, and in some cases, one where India holds more leverage. There was a time when American leaders treated India as a nation desperate for approval, a junior partner looking for a seat at the table. That era is finished. India now walks into the room as one of the biggest players, commanding attention, demanding respect, and shaping outcomes. You don't dictate terms to a country that has the world's largest population, the fastest growing economy, and a military that's modernizing at breakneck speed. You negotiate, you compromise, you adapt, and that's exactly what's happening. Look at how global summits play out today. The G20, the Mauritius climate talks. India isn't sitting quietly in the corner anymore. It's driving the conversation, positioning itself as the voice of the developing world, the so-called global south. When India speaks, others listen. And if America doesn't listen, it risks being sidelined. That's how much things have changed. This shift terrifies the old guard in Washington. They're used to calling the shots. They're used to barking orders and having allies fall in line. But India doesn't fall in line. It doesn't take lectures. It charts its own path. Whether it's buying oil from Russia despite Western sanctions, or refusing to be dragged into America's quarrels, India proves time and again that it will not be bullied. And that's precisely why America's tone has softened. Because it has to. The uncomfortable truth is that Washington no longer has the leverage it once did. Economic aid. India doesn't need it. Military backing. India has options. Diplomatic clout. India is carving out its own. The traditional tools of pressure are useless here, and every American president, Trump included, has been forced to recognize that. This isn't weakness, this is reality. When two powers sit across the table and both know the other is indispensable, you get negotiation, not domination. That's what the new US-India relationship looks like. Equal footing, mutual benefit, strategic necessity. And that's exactly why the tough talk evaporates the moment New Delhi is involved. Let's be honest, America can still browbeat Europe. It can still squeeze smaller nations. But India isn't in that category anymore. It's not a client state. It's not a junior partner. It's a heavyweight. And you don't push heavyweights around. You deal with them. That's the new world order. A stage where Washington no longer calls all the shots, and where India's voice is impossible to ignore. That's why the script has flipped. because the old power dynamic has collapsed, and in its place stands a partnership built not on fear or obedience, but on necessity. And necessity changes everything. Here's the brutal reality. For all the chest-thumping, all the bombastic rhetoric, all the claims of being the ultimate deal-maker, there are limits. And the limit is India. He can shout tough words at Europe, mock NATO, rage at China, slam Mexico, but when it comes to India, the script changes. Because this is one arena where a misstep doesn't just cost headlines, it costs real power, real partnerships, and potentially America's standing in the world. The reason is obvious. India isn't the kind of country you can casually insult or threaten. You can't slap tariffs on India without consequences boomeranging back at you. You can't talk down to a country that sits at the center of global trade routes, dominates technology talent, and holds the balance in the Indo-Pacific. Tough talk doesn't scare India. It just forces it to lean into other partnerships. With Russia, with China, with Europe. And that would be a disaster for Washington. That's why every time the rhetoric heats up, it cools just as fast. Because the stakes are too high. America needs India for defense cooperation, for countering Beijing, for expanding trade. That's not optional, it's survival. Without India, America's Indo-Pacific vision collapses. Without India, Washington's influence in Asia fades. Without India, the balance of power tilts toward China. That's not a risk anyone in the White House is willing to take. And let's not forget elections. Being tough on India doesn't win votes. It loses them. Indian Americans are politically active, wealthy, and growing in influence. They've become a swing factor in key states. The last thing any president wants is to alienate them. So you see a strange dance play out, fiery rhetoric for the cameras, but a quiet retreat behind closed doors. It's theater, nothing more. Because in the real world, you can't afford to antagonize India. This isn't weakness. It's recognition of reality. The world has changed, and the leverage isn't where it used to be. America can pressure Europe, it can squeeze Latin America, it can even risk confrontation with Beijing. But India has carved out a position where toughness turns into diplomacy, threats turn into partnership, and confrontation turns into calculation. And that calculation always comes out the same way: tread carefully. That's why the loud roars are reserved for others. That's why the bluster melts when the conversation turns to New Delhi. Because one false move could undo years of strategic alignment, billions in trade, and the fragile balance of power holding Asia together. No president can risk that, and Trump knows it. So the next time you hear chest beating about being tough on everyone, remember the exception. There is one nation that even the loudest, most confrontational leader cannot afford to push too far. And that nation is India, because in the game of global power, India has earned the right to be untouchable. So let's stop pretending this is still a one-way street. The days when Washington could dictate terms to New Delhi are over. India calls the shots now, and every American leader, Trump included, has to play by those rules. He may roar like a lion elsewhere, but when it comes to India, he has no choice but to tread very, very carefully.